This is the Reluctant Leader podcast, the podcast designed to help you step out of the shadows and become an inspirational leader. I'm your host, Mark Terrell, and each episode I will be getting to grips with a leadership topic by interviewing an expert in their field. I'll be picking their brains for those golden nuggets that will help you be the best you can be. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing at thereluctantleader.co.uk, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So let's get on with the show. Today I'm talking to Natalie Lewis. She describes herself as an unconventional HR consultant. She supports small businesses to build the foundation of HR and business, ensuring everything implemented contributes to the overall profitability and growth. She works with directors and business owners to launch established businesses into the next stage of their growth by improving their people, their brand, reputation, and profitability. At all stages, company values and people are at the centre of everything she endorses. Hope you enjoy this chat we had about culture, and I'll catch you all on the other side. Natalie, welcome to the Reluctant Leader podcast.
Hello, good morning.
I think the first thing I should say is actually we've never actually met in person. It's funny how the world works these days. I think we were part of a networking group, and then for one reason or another we connected on LinkedIn, and then I saw what you post, which are always very interesting, and the reason why I asked you to come on and talk about culture, because I think a lot of the things you post about is about culture. But before we get into all that, the first thing I'd like to know, I'm sure everybody else listening would like to know, is why do you do what you do, and what was the pivotal moment that took you down this path?
Interesting question. Hi, yes, Mark. Okay, so I have always worked in HR. I actually did a degree in animal behaviour, and I have to say that there's many comparisons that I can draw between animal behaviour and working in different businesses. It always makes me laugh how much I learnt about business and humans from that degree. I actually I'm doing what I do now, as in running dynamic HR services, because I've always had a passion for business. I've had a passion for people. I've loved sort of business strategy and getting involved in that. But the reason why I'm actually working for myself is quite pertinent to this podcast about culture. I've worked in various different cultures throughout my life, or my business life, and I've found that actually most of those cultures didn't suit me, or I didn't suit them one way or another, and I found them far too restrictive. I had a really poor experience just before setting up my own business, which really kind of pushed me into becoming self-employed. I worked in a culture of blame and micromanagement, and I think a lot of people can resonate with that. And that culture really severely affected my mental health. I was having, to the extent that I was having regular anxiety attacks, and I just hated where I worked. Simple as that. So I actually left there and was looking to go to a new job. I'd set that up. But in the between sort of finishing at one place and going to that, I actually realised that, I don't think I could ever put my mental health into the hands of another person. So that would mean that I'd have to be my own boss. And so I set up Dynamic HR Services. So that's where I've got to. Yes, it's an interesting story.
So it's more than just a job. It's an actual, you're protecting your health, doing something that's right for you, so that you haven't got anybody else that's sort of putting on something that you don't believe in. So that's really important to you. Something that you're doing something that you believe in and that you're making a difference.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's actually those experiences that have pushed me to have the vision and HR of HR and business strategy that I have now, that I I'm really passionate about helping businesses to improve, because I think if you can foster happy staff in the way that they want to be treated, then you will ultimately have much more of a successful business.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. That's good. So let's get stuck into what we're going to talk about, which is what you've already mentioned. Actually, is culture, business culture. So what would you say is a good culture? How do you define a good culture within a business?
That's a really interesting one, and something probably that I can't exactly answer in a sense, because a good culture is one that fosters happy employees. Now, everyone's different, and everyone's motivated by different things. So a culture is going to be defined really by the leader. So the leader of the business is who defines the culture in the way that they behave, the things that they set up around them, the processes, the rules, all of those different things. And then I suppose that really what I would say is that the important part is getting employing staff who actually fit with that culture. I personally think that a good culture, certainly for a good culture for me, if I was back being employed by someone, would be a culture of autonomy, an outcome-based culture whereby, you can work when and how you want, but you reach outcomes. Now, that's quite a new sort of culture that we're seeing coming into various different businesses. Google is rather like that. There's a company called People, who develop people HR software. They're an interesting company. There's also a company called Zappos, and they all have that sort of culture. And I think I've seen a big trend heading towards that type of business and different culture. Mm-hmm. So again, it's sort of, just to sort of reiterate, it's based on autonomy, and whereby employees are responsible for themselves and other people around them, rather than that sort of management structure where, a manager gives a task, says go away, come back, and go away, do that, and come back to me. And it's very much driven by outcomes. So I think that's definitely a trend, and that personally would work for me. A good culture, I suppose, really is one where employees are at the centre of things, where they're listened to, and really where they're taken care of. I've always said that staff are your greatest asset, but they're also your biggest risk, so you've got to get it right.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, as we're talking on this podcast about leadership and how we can help those that maybe are in a leadership position, how they can be more effective.
Yes.
So bearing that in mind, how could somebody in a leadership position, do you think, start to think about what their culture is, firstly, and then whether it fits in, I guess, with what they want the business to achieve? I think that's the important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so whether we're talking, I'm assuming your listeners sort of range from a one-man band to people who actually have teams and manage staff. So whether you're a one-man band or a team of people, everybody's business, whether they're one person or multiple, has a culture at this moment in time. Whether it's the correct culture for them is a different matter. So I suppose what we have to look at is what is culture. Culture is one of those funny etherical sort of things that is difficult to define, but it's ultimately the environment which people work in. The energy that a leader puts out there. It's the rules, the processes, all of those different things come together and fit to create a culture. It's the behaviours that are seen within that business. So it's generally you as a business owner or a leader who consciously, and sometimes more often, I suppose, unconsciously, dictates the company culture. And it may often come from, cultures that perhaps they've worked in as they, as they've worked up that sort of career ladder. It's the identity of a leader expressed through the organisation. So I suppose in order sort of to decide what your culture is going to be, I always I speak to my clients and say, right, well, what makes you unique? What do other people say about you consistently? What do you know that others don't? All of these things can be used to sort of define a culture. How do you do things differently? Who are you? Who are you not? And what do you stand for and against? And those sort of things, if you sit down and have a think about those, the types of words that come out of that exercise will start to define the culture of your business, or how, the culture that you perhaps want to foster. Okay, it gives you an indication of who you are. And then going forward with the leadership side of things, it's about defining your values and then making sure that you actually follow through and live those values. And that can be quite difficult, especially when you've got a large team who may have different values as well to you. So assuming that, a company, whether it's a start out or they're looking to actually create a new culture, which is quite often something I get involved with. I think it's, I've lost my train of thought.
No, I get what you're saying, and I can relate to that, because when my background is a family retail business, and I went through the ranks and I ended up as leading that business. Now, I think I did a reasonable job, but I didn't really think about it in these terms. I didn't really know what my values were, but obviously I had them. I had values. It's not that we just, just suddenly got to make up some sort of values. We just got to dig deep and find out what those values are. And they don't have to be actually complicated. Some of these values are basic human traits that are important to us. And if they're violated, then that's when we, and sometimes you just got to check in with yourself. So if that happened, how would you feel? And I think a lot of people think, well, how do I get to this point where my values, and then I've got to take into account the values of all the staff and all those sort of things. But I think if you get a core set of values that everybody buys into, that's when everyone actually gels and actually understands, well, this is what we're about. I was working with a client not so long ago, and I said, look, what's acceptable and what isn't? And then that conversation is very interesting, because people, have their own little bits and pieces to say. But at the end of it, you say, well, actually, what's come out of there is this is important to you, this is important to you, and this is important to you. And everyone said, yeah, that is important to us. So you're absolutely right. And it's about having that vision, isn't it? Having a vision of what is acceptable and what the culture is all about. What is it? What do we want to achieve here? Yeah.
You've hit on something very important there. I think it's funny, over the years that I've worked in HR, society has definitely changed. And this is something I'm really passionate about, because society I'd say is changing. It's also, I would say, it's got to a point where it has changed. People have got access to so much more these days, and they know exactly what's going on in the world around them. And what people want from their jobs is certainly changing. Employees want interesting work that makes a difference and, as you say, aligns with their personal sense of purpose and their values. They want leaders who care about them as an individual, more importantly than just, as a number. And they want the opportunity to grow and to learn within their roles. The youngest of our generation they're a bit of an enigma, and you probably, lots of people have been talking about this. But actually, do you know what? All they want is experiences, and they want to be inspired. So they're not actually that more complicated than any other generation. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of the sort of, as I see the future of business, I think there's certain certainly research is definitely showing that what people want is sharing a sense of purpose. So that vision, as you say, working towards a shared vision. Mm-hmm. And that's really important. Sharing similar values, as again you said. And I think that's probably, I would say, is actually key to an organisation. Employees, everybody that you take on in your organisation should have very similar values. Mm-hmm. People want to be stretched and challenged in a role, but not to the point of stress. They want to be able to learn new skills and have new experiences. Autonomy and working to outcomes, as I said before, is really key these days, and more and more research is showing that that's what employees want. And then even better is that people want to receive regular feedback. Now that can be quite difficult, I think, for some leaders to give that and to provide that. But that's definitely something that's being demanded by the workforce. I think
that is essential, I think, isn't it? One of the things that I see is that I think we're all guilty of it. We don't give enough. We don't catch people doing things right enough.
Correct.
But we're great at finding faults and seeing when things are wrong.
Yes.
And focusing on that. I mean, it happens in all walks of life, whether it's family or we are good at picking up things that are wrong, but actually when things are right, we're not very good at that, are we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the last thing on my list there was being thanked. People actually being rewarded and recognised for what they do. And as you say, catching people doing performing the good behaviours rather than, some of the things that might irritate you as a leader. And the more you focus on those good behaviours, the less the bad behaviours become. But I think, it's things are changing. I think even the way that we treat and motivate people is changing, and all of these things they're all connected to culture. Because if you can have a culture of, as you say, sort of a culture that last culture that I had was a blame culture, and it was one of micromanagement because the leader of the business had no trust in their employees. So, and it wasn't down to the many, it was down to one or two people and bad experiences that then marred it for the rest of the people in the business, which is sad.
Yeah, and the important point there is, I think, is actually being consistent, isn't it?
Yes, consistent.
Just because one employee is behaving in a particular way which isn't to your liking, you've got to be consistent in the way that you handle that, and not to bring personality into it, isn't it? I think that's quite a skill. I know in the past with my challenges with employees that were testing me, to put it bluntly, is quite a skill to actually rise above it and actually, rather than actually go down the route of it's just a personality thing. It's actually just about attitudes and behaviours, which that's what it comes down to, isn't it? It's the attitude and the behaviour that you've got to instill the right attitude and the right behaviour.
Absolutely. I mean, so a lot of the work that I do at the moment is going into businesses where the workplace culture has turned toxic. So, there's sort of poor behaviours being shown, poor productivity, poor performance from the sort of, I would say, the minority more than the majority, but sometimes it's sort of more 50-50. Mm-hmm. And then what you see is high absence. Poor productivity, high absence, and those really affect the bottom line. And what I do is go in and identify a number of things. I start off by identifying what culture the business leader, it's normally a director of the business, wants to create. So we sit down and we look at that, and we discuss, well, do you want more of a corporate culture? Do you want an autonomous culture, more flat level? What is it, or something in between? What is it that you want? Mm-hmm. What are the company values? And obviously, as we've discussed before, those values often stem from their own personal values and what they want to create, which is absolutely fine. And then we identify the people in the business. and who fits that sort of new culture and new values that they want to foster. And often, I have to say that sometimes we have to go in and we have to remove the wrong people, because it's not just wrong for them, but it's also wrong for the business. Mm-hmm. And if somebody is behaving poorly, it's often because they're unhappy. No staff or no staff member who is feeling like they're not respected or don't fit into the workplace is going to push themselves to come in. Perhaps if they've got a bit of a sniffle or whatever, they're just going to take that day off and think, well, sod it, I'm just going to sit here and claim sickness or whatever it might be. So I think it's really important work to do is to sit down and define your culture, is actually to label the culture as it is now, and then decide whether that's something that you're happy with, that culture is correct for you and your business, or if you want to set your sights on a new culture. Yeah,
and I guess what's sprung to mind there is actually you've got to be quite brave, haven't you? I'm sure with the clients you've worked with, I'm sure people have thought, really, have I really got to do that? And I guess part of what you do is actually just encourage them. You've got to stick your neck out and be brave. If you really want this to happen and you want things to change, then you've got to do something. Otherwise, it just carries on the same.
Well, absolutely. I mean, my job is to empower people and to give them the tools and skills to be able to do that. And also sometimes the encouragement to do the right thing. It's an interesting one, really. It does take bravery. But the benefits to getting your culture right are that, your productivity and your customer service improves. Everything improves from there, and people actually feel like they're part of something and they want to stay with you. You'll find that staff will actually bother to go the extra mile when they feel rewarded, when they feel recognised, and when they feel that their sense of purpose and their values align with the business that they're in. And certainly I think, from a personal experience, I think I only found a couple of businesses that I worked in previously before setting up my own. I actually only found that in a couple of places. So I think it's definitely something that people are wanting more of, is that sense of sort of community, I guess it is. So yeah, absolutely. No, it does take bravery. And even just taking on one member of staff, I believe is brave for people, for leaders and business owners to do. So to take on a team and be able to manage them well, it does take something. And, I think not all of us are born to lead. Certainly can learn to lead. But it takes time and it takes courage to arm yourself with those tools.
Yeah, and that's interesting you just said that, actually. I'm sure you've come across people that want a quick fix. They want you to come in and, well, what do I need to do? Wave your magic wand and sort it out in no time. But time is the thing, isn't it? It takes time. It takes, you've got to be consistent. It's like, running a business. You've got to be consistent in what you do so that people understand what you're about. And it's the same when you're in a leadership role. You've got to be consistent. You've got to stick by your values. And when you see something that's outside the values of the business, then you've got to stop it. Because if you don't stop it and make sure that you stand up to something that's wrong, then all you're doing really is encouraging more of that behaviour, aren't you?
Absolutely. And that's then when, I end up coming in is to revert that culture, the toxic culture, because the bad behaviours have happened. That's when I step in and have to take it back to either the old culture or we create a new one or the other. But yeah, going back to that sort of that sense of bravery, sometimes I think what we've got to realise that not everyone is right for every culture, and recruiting the right people is really important. And that's like sort of the 101, I suppose, of business, is making sure that you recruit people to the values and the correct values that you have set and defined. But also is if somebody is not fitting into, your culture, your values, then you need to remove them. And sometimes it's through no fault of their own, but, you know, ultimately you've got to look after your business. And quite frankly, I mean, there's been times where I've removed people from a business, and they've written to me after sort of maybe 6 months down the line and said, thank you so much. Do you know what? I wasn't happy in that business. And you gave me the push to go and find somewhere that I did fit into. So it's, you know, there can be benefits on both sides.
Yeah. And that's important to remember that, isn't it? If someone is actually stuck in a business that actually they don't want to be there, the best thing for them and for the business is for them to find something that they are happy with, rather than causing them stress and the business and the leadership of that business stress. But what I think what would be useful now is to actually give some examples of what you've come across as really good culture, how people have done that, so that maybe we can inspire people as to the right way to go about creating a good culture. And I know that's not easy because not, you know, every culture is different. But is there some sort of fundamentals that you always work to, that you encourage business leaders to work with?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's kind of difficult to define because each culture is different, and obviously a different culture will attract different personalities. The cultures that work best are well-defined cultures, where a vision and a purpose is very well-defined and everyone is driving towards that same purpose. The values are simple, and probably not a huge number of them, sort of say maybe 4 or 5 values is about right. But those values are actually not just sat there on the wall or on a mug or on a coaster or, you know, wherever you want to put them, toilet doors or whatever. That they're actually, you know, lived, those, and that people actually use those values to make decisions within the business. So, you know, I always say to staff that if they're on their own and they've got to make a decision, and they've got no one else to ask about it, I always say to them, go to the business values, and if that decision or the outcome that you're trying to get to ticks all of the values, then crack on and do it. I think also where leaders are, again, they live and eat those values. You know, it's about living your values. I think certainly for the sort of future of business, the best cultures that I have found, or the sort of most successful cultures that I have found, that I've worked with, have the sense of purpose, of course, the values as well, but also are moving towards what people want. So the future of sort of HR and business, which is a lot more autonomy, a lot more flexibility, and the choice to be able to do their jobs in the way that they feel fit. So that can feel quite scary to leaders, I think, because you always have a defined way that you think something should be done. And, you know, you can say it's quite easy to staff is to say, you know, do this task and do it this way. But actually it might not be the best way, and it might not be best for that member of staff to do it in that way. So I think having a lot more autonomy and freedom to actually complete tasks or, as I say, work to outcomes in the way that they think is best, is also a really good culture to foster. At the end of the day, as a leader, as a director of a business, you bring staff in to do the things or the tasks, the work that you can't do or you don't have time to do. You've got to trust them. Making sure that your recruitment process is ultimately the right thing. The recruitment process picks up the right people with the right skills is really important. So if you're going to bring in an expert, let's say you take on a marketing expert or a salesperson, or it could be anyone really, you've got to trust them to be able to use their skills and experience. And I think that's where a lot of businesses go wrong, is that they then put restrictions on those people and tell them that they have to do a task in a certain way.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed is actually, and it's a skill that a lot of people aren't taught, is actually the explicitness. Being explicit, actually, what you want,
Yes.
and using the right language.
Yes.
I think we're all guilty of being a bit woolly and a bit like assuming, but having a clear idea of what it is you want and actually expressing that explicitly is one of the key skills I see. Is to make sure that people know exactly what the outcome is, what the outcome is wanted or needed, and so there's no ambiguity. So you know where we got to go to, and if you want autonomous to be autonomous, then that's where we got to take. That's where we want to take the business, and how you do it is up to you. That's bringing in that autonomy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's really important. But also, I think the interesting thing is that a business that has a very clearly defined purpose, clearly defined values, and has a good business plan. A shared business plan as well, so that where all employees understand what they're working towards and what outcomes they're working towards. So whether it's be financial or a certain level of customer service, or whatever it might be, that makes life much easier when you're then providing staff with if you want to be able to allow your staff to be autonomous, they've got to understand what they're working towards.
And that's the crucial thing, setting out in the first instance to have a clear vision so everyone's bought into that, and then have the values attached to that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Great stuff. Okay. I think it's probably time to think about sort of summing up a bit and how let's think about how we can sort of sum up what we've been talking about. I'll let you think about 3 top tips in a minute, but
okay.
Let's think about what you've seen gone wrong, what you see goes right, and sort of a little bit of a sum up here of what people can really think about when it comes to instilling that culture within their business. When maybe where you become a leader in the business, where I seem to come across people that have started the business and got to a place where they're spending most of their time leading their team, which is not what they obviously set out to do. So with that in mind, how do you instill that? How do you instill that culture, which firstly you've got to articulate, and then secondly you've got to live by?
Interesting question. Okay. I would say that anyone who's either got a business at the moment or has moved into a place of leadership, I think they've got to be very clear on the culture that they want to foster within their business. Keeping in mind the people that they've got around them. Define their purpose. Define what it is they want to achieve in that business. So whether it's financial or whatever it is, so that will be guided by the business plan, assuming there is one. But if there isn't one, then get one together. And it doesn't have to be a big, business plan. It can just be something I use as a business canvas. But it's essentially it gives people a focus. Define your values, and then bring. I say it's easy. It's easy to talk about it, to bring people on board with those values. But if people already have similar values, then it's not a difficult one to do. Consider who, if anyone, doesn't fit that culture and values that you want to define, and then have a discussion with a professional, an HR professional, about how do you either remove them or perhaps bring them on board. Which can be difficult to do, but
or find something more suitable. Maybe it's
or find something more suitable for them. Absolutely, there might be another area of the business that suits them better. Because let's not forget that most businesses, if they're big enough, will have a culture, but also each department may have a slightly different culture. So absolutely,
yes.
And then personally, I think giving feedback regular feedback is absolutely key to bringing staff on board, and keeping everyone focused, revisiting those outcomes and and making sure that you're looking at giving people examples of where they have fulfilled a company value or haven't, and being honest and open about that without criticising. I think criticism is toxic. And then saying thank you to staff and meaning it. Those are all things that I would suggest.
And sometimes it is those simple things, isn't it? Like you've just said, just saying thank you for doing something that maybe we've taken for granted. They've just done it because they think it's part of their job. Well, actually, a lot of people do things that are actually probably outside their job spec, and it gets ignored. And actually, when it gets ignored, people think, well, I did something and it wasn't recognised, so maybe I won't bother next time.
Absolutely. And do you know what? I think it's people say to me, or people or business owners say to me, God, that's really difficult because I'm not in the business all the time, so I can't see people doing the right things. Well, you can ask the other people around them, because they can ask their work colleagues, what did Bob do well in the last few weeks? And I think, you can use them as sort of, I wouldn't say spies, but people to provide feedback on each other, positive. And sometimes, there may be times where, things need to change, but I encourage positive feedback, certainly, when sort of starting to change a culture. So it is possible to do. And personally, I just think if, certain leaders can make excuses for not doing things like that, because, it does tap into that sort of emotional side of work. And I think that over the last number of years, that's maybe been discouraged in quite a corporate environment, but that's certainly a way where we're heading back towards a more human workplace, and therefore we are going to have to get in touch with scary emotions, and actually be able to communicate those. Yes,
a wake-up call to everybody, because we all know that it's so easy to move jobs these days, and I think it's when we talk about employees, it's a buyer's market, I think, in most instances. And if business owners, if they don't keep their key staff, then it's going to be expensive to replace them. And we want to encourage them, give them ways to actually hold on to them.
Absolutely. It's expensive to replace staff. It's expensive when things go wrong. So again, going back to recruitment, it's really important that leaders recruit to the right values and the right culture. And often I get asked, well, how do you know someone's values? I personally use psychometric testing, because I think that's something that is a useful tool, but not everyone is able to afford psychometric testing or want to use it. But you can certainly, the thing is with employment law at the moment is that you have the ability to write in a probation period. And I think what we have to do again is sort of be upfront in thinking that if someone's joining your business, you can perhaps give them a 6-month. I think a 6-month probation period is long enough to get to know someone and make sure that they actually really do fit that, the culture and the values, and monitor those people throughout that, so that you can actually say definitively that, yes, they fit or no, they don't. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things, but recruitment's key. Removing the wrong people at the right time is also key, but doing it in a way that, is minimising risk. So following the law. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you've probably already done it, but I think if we just let's leave our listeners with 3 top tips as to be in a leadership position. How can we, 3 things that could help us to create a good culture within our business?
Okay. I'm going to be unconventional and I'm going to go for 6 things. Sorry.
Okay, fair enough.
Define the culture that you want in your business. Set a vision for your staff. Underpin those with your company values. Review who, if anyone, doesn't fit those culture and values, and take action. Provide your staff with outcomes rather than, here's a task, go away and do it. provide them with regular feedback and more autonomy, and say thank you to them.
Brilliant. Very comprehensive, and I think if everybody, hopefully they didn't, but if they really fast forward to the end of this, then they would have got all we talked about in a snapshot, which is brilliant.
I hope so.
So thank you, Natalie, for your time today. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Yes, I do hope so too. And thank you to everyone who's listening.
Thank you for listening today. As action leads to outcomes, make sure you make a note to start, stop, or continue doing whatever struck a chord in this episode. Don't forget to subscribe at thereluctantleader.co.uk, where you'll find links to all the past episodes, blogs, and how you can get in touch with me. Until next time, bye for now.